All right, very quickly then to recap yesterday, and I've got these things, I've got the recordings done, and they've all been produced. I just have to throw them out on YouTube. But we went over the page on getting started, and we went over parts 1, 2, and 3. We did the getting started, we added a controller, we added a view. So far out of the MVC process, we've done the VC. So as you can guess, today what we're going to do is we're going to start working with the model. Now this next section that's on the model is actually very short. All right, just so you know, it's only a few pages long, and then so is the one with creating a connection string. So we'll get through those pretty quick, probably before our first break. But then the next one, accessing your model's data from a controller, is longer. My hope is today we can do 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, something like that, or 4, 5, 6, and 7. We'll finish this up then tomorrow. Remember again, tomorrow I'll be leaving approximately 2:45. All right, we'll see how that goes. It might even be a little bit earlier than that, but we'll see. All right. So after we got done with part 0, so to speak, we went into part 1, the getting started. And in the getting started, basically all we did was we went in and we created a brand new project. All right. We called it MVC movie. All right. We chose MVC. We had individual user account for our authentication. And then we kind of just looked at stuff that we've looked at before. In other words, we looked at the project out of the box. And I know we've done that before. And I showed you how you can, it's bootstrapped from the get-go. Again, not really anything new in there, so to speak, from what we have covered previously. Then we went in and we added the controller. All right. And when we first added the controller, and again, I've mentioned this before, but when we first added the controller, we were using the controller as both the controller and the view. There's been no model yet. We're going to do that today. But when we first did it, that's what we did. So in other words, we came in here and we added a brand new controller. Ideally, at least, you saw when we chose this and we chose empty controller, the differences. We didn't have those methods pre-written for us. And I may have mentioned this to you already, I may not have, but just so you hear the word. When you use this, that's on the screen here, and for example, if you choose the MVC controller with views using Entity Framework where it creates the edit and the delete, etc. for you, that's called scaffolding. Because what's happening is there's built-in software from Microsoft that's building the beginning of that code for you. All right? And you probably, maybe some of you in here are more familiar with it than me, but it's like when you scaffold, if you're building a house or you're building a building, sometimes you kind of put some fake stuff up, so to speak, just so that you're able to walk around and do other things in there, and then eventually that comes down. All right? I know last night that my daughter asked, they're moving into, her and her husband are moving into a new house right around Christmas time, and I hadn't seen it yet, so she asked if I wanted to go see it. So we went over there, and I found it really interesting, because I always thought, my wife said the same thing. I was always of the mindset that when you build a house, one of the first things you do is you pour the foundation, right? It's got a basement, but we couldn't go down in the basement. There's no steps or anything, but you could see down there. As far as the foundation, what they have is they have chipped rock. I mean, in a lot of it. Their whole garage is chipped rock. So they haven't actually poured the concrete onto it yet. But it's kind of neat to see some of the stuff they've done because they've done their own share of scaffolding in there. You can see some of it. All right. So we built this Hello World controller, which really we wouldn't be using in a project, but we're using it so that we've got kind of a dummy controller so we can do whatever, practice stuff we have to do. So we went in there, and the first thing that we did was we changed index, which by default returns an action result and returns view. We made it return a string that just said this is the default action. And we added another method called welcome, which also returns a string. Then we saw how to call both of those, okay? and we took a little look at the routeconfig.cs file and talked about that a little bit. We had talked about it before. All right. I mentioned the HTML encoding yesterday to you and talked a little bit about, you've got to look at it that, I don't know if you've ever heard this, but these are the numbers that I've heard, okay? That really out of about every 100 people who are doing bad things on the internet, there's really only 1, 2, or 3 that are actually out to really do things where that if they got caught, they'd be arrested. In other words, a lot of people go onto a site and they see if they can break in because they want to be able to tell people they broke in. They're not going to necessarily do anything out there. But this HTML encoding is one way to make it harder for them to break in. All right? What you're trying to do is you're trying to remove backdoors. All right? Ask a question, because this just popped into my head. This was, 1980s or 1990s. Any of you ever see the movie War Games with Matthew Broderick? I mean, it's an old movie, okay? We used to show it. And the point is, Matthew Broderick, you probably have at least heard of him, and he's married to that, what's her name, Sarah Jessica Parker, all right? But now he must be, if he's not my age, maybe 10 years younger, I don't know. But he was a teenager in the movie, okay? The point is, what happened was that what they did was they had a computer that was basically going to, it both played games, and when I say games, realistic war games. So like if we were going to be attacked by North Korea, what would happen, etc. All right? And then what happened was somehow something got screwed up in the games, and it really thought they were being attacked. So it was going to do things it shouldn't have done. All right? So the point is, what happened was there was a special way to get into the computers itself, and you could do things that you couldn't otherwise do. That was a backdoor. All right? And many developers, when they create an application, they leave a backdoor. All right? So they can get in real fast and do things. They don't have to worry about being an administrator or being an end user or whatever. It's just they're kind of super person, so to speak. And the bad thing about that is if somebody else finds out, typically if it's a password and they find out the password, they can go in and do, then they can do a lot of damage. That's why today you're seeing a lot of stuff with retinal scans, and thumbprints, etc. All right. And then finally we went on, and where we ended yesterday on the third installment out of these 11 was adding a view. So again, what we did here was we took the code that we had put into the controller itself, and we ripped it out of the controller and put it in its own method. So you saw when we came in here, one of the first things that we did was we, again, it says in here, click, go into the views, click add, all right, then MVC page with layout, razor, etc. We called it index. Yeah, that all makes sense. That's no big thing. But when you look in here, again, the key takeaway is the fact that we were making the code, the display code, we were putting in the view. All right? And let's face it, this example right here, page 5 of 18, there's nothing in here. But what I do want you to get, and please look up on the screen here, this line of code right here. If you put this line of code in every single page you have on your website, that means that every single page in the website will automatically use _layout.cshtml as its default layout. Does that make sense? If you don't want there to be any layout whatsoever, none, you don't want there to be any. Maybe I'm going to do my own layout in here. Then up here you say layout equal null. All right? Then either you'll have absolutely no layout, so it's like having no CSS or whatever, or you're doing it in here. All right? So we went in and we did that, and we saw, yeah, it said hello from the browser, etc. No big thing right there. There it was. All right, we went through that. And then as it says, we went in and we changed that _layout.cshtml. All right? And again, It's right here, and you also saw it. It's kind of broken down into 3 different parts. Really 4, I guess. The stuff that you've got right here, all of this stuff, is the stuff that doesn't show on the screen. So notice what's in there. We've got our doc type, our head, our HTML tags. Those aren't big things. Our meta tags, those aren't big things. But you should know by now this line right here is making it responsive. That shouldn't be new to anybody. This line right here is going to say whatever the name of the page is. So for instance, if it's about, then the title should be about-movie app. Make sense? All right. These 2 pages, or these 2 lines rather, say everything that I bundled up together. All right. So in this case, everything that's in my content CSS, make it available. Everything that's in my modernizer, make available. All right. So that's the first part. Then the second part, we talked a little bit about this yesterday, is everything that goes to right here. And that's setting up our navigation area. All right. Enough said on that. Then right here, as far as what's left, I mentioned this before. The key line is that one that says render body. That's literally running, all right, what's inside of the associated method. Then there's a real simple footer. One thing for you to realize if you look at this right here, see that date, time, now, year? That's C# because it's got razor syntax at the beginning, and that's going out and grabbing the current year. All right, not that, is that a big thing? Well, heck no. All right, but if we wanted to, as an example, let's say that we wanted to have a current date on there and time. So if anybody ever comes out to our site, they can get the date and time. We could put that stuff in too. All right. Okay, then what we did in there was we changed this right here. So our title was changed to MVC movie, and we changed so that our tab, notice about movie app, etc. All right. Talked about this already. Yeah, they explain everything that I've already talked about. Now, what you're going to find, you already know this, that if you go back and take the time to actually read this, there are times when my explanations may not totally jive with the authors. All right, because I'm trying to put it in my own words, and I'm giving you my take on it. All right, again, I've said this to you before. I don't like to sit there and read to you. Okay, then we went into passing data from the controller to the view, and I mentioned this before. A template should never perform business logic or interact with a database directly. I showed you that schematic that I had that kind of showed ASP.NET in action, so to speak. All right, and we talked about the fact that there were never arrows between the view and the model, and that's what they're talking about here. Finally, we went in and we set this thing up so that when you put this in, if you look on the screen here, in the welcome, now if we go in there and we set, hello, if I said question mark hello equal Jeff, ampersand num times equal 5, it would say hello Jeff 5 times. And that's the code that makes that happen. All right. That's just a plain vanilla for loop. You've used them before, so there's nothing new right there. All right. That was it. I asked this last time, and when I asked, everybody said, no, I don't have any questions. So literally, I'm taking for granted that all the stuff that was in there makes sense to you. And I'm hoping that that's, something that, yeah, it makes sense to me, Jeff. Okay. All right, so let's go on to the next lessons in here, and I'm going to open up, for now, 4, 5, and 6. All right, and I'm going to jump over to lesson 4. This is adding a model. Not much in here, 5 pages, but, and I can't say this to you too many times, please ask if something in here doesn't make sense. Because somewhere around mid-month or so, we're going to come in and we're going to be creating one of these as a class. All right, we're going to create our own database. We'll put our own products in there. We'll put our own customers in there, etc. All right? Okay. So it says in this section, you'll add some classes for managing movies in the database. We'll use Entity Framework, and we're going to use Code First. Can somebody tell me, in your own words, what does Code First mean? What do you do first? Code. What does the code make for you? The database, or at least the database tables. When you do database first, it's pretty much in the other direction. All right, and there's even other ways to do it than that. All right. So we're just going to follow the steps. So if you would please, I'm taking for granted you all have your project up. So if you do, please go over to your models folder. All right. Right now in models, we've got account, identity, and manage. Okay, what we're going to right mouse click on here, and we're going to choose add. I'm sorry. We're going to right mouse click on models, and we're going to choose add class. All right. And they want us to call the class movie. Literally, that's it. Movie. There's all sorts of debate over this, but just so you know, what most people do is either they name their classes singular and then their tables plural, or they name their classes plural and their tables singular. Do you understand what I'm saying? And it's just, where do you put the S? I'm going to call this movie like they do. All right, and that gives us this. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add that. Somebody tell me, what's the shortcut if you want to have it create basically that line right there? What's the shortcut? Type in prop, P-R-O-P, tab, tab. So if you want to do that, you can. But please put all this stuff in there for your movie class. Now, this particular project, in many ways, this particular project isn't all that reminiscent of real life. And what I mean is, this is the only table that's in our database. Everybody hear that? Makes it much easier, but what that means is we got to put everything in here. So if we decided we wanted other stuff in here, like a movie rating, movie reviews, etc., sooner or later it would necessitate additional tables. Does that make sense to everyone? All right. Is there anything that's in here that people don't understand? Is there any field that's in here that people don't understand? All right. Now, what the author says here, and again, I'm just following the author's text. What the author says here on the bottom of page 3, I just want to show it to you because it's different than the way we did it, okay? But what the author says here, after we do that, says we'll use the movies class, etc. In order to use system.data.entity, you need to install the entity framework. We had done that earlier, no big thing. And it says, in the same file, add the following movie DB context class. All right, well, when I'm looking at this, I don't know if you agree, but I'm looking right here. Correct me if I'm wrong. This right here is exactly the same, correct? So the author's saying that down on the bottom, add this. We can do that, but I just want to say before you do that, please, this is the same thing that when we went through our example, we right mouse clicked, we chose we made a new folder called DAL. Remember that data access layer? That's what we used. But I believe the reason they're doing it this way is they're saying, hey, we only have one table. We might as well just put another class in here. So if you would please copy the code that you see right here, copy it to the clipboard, and put it in right underneath this. So in other words, there's the code. And again, you can see I'm getting errors here. Everybody see this? The underscore? So if I highlight over here, it says you need to add the using system.data.entity. So you can either manually type that in or you can do it the way I did it. Either way. Now, they mention on page 4 of this lesson, it says the movie DB context class, the one that I just asked you to put in, the one, right here in blue, represents the entity framework movie database context. In other words, this is going to be the conduit, or whatever you want to call it, between our code and the actual database that's going to be created. Does that make sense to people? All right. So it says it will handle fetching, storing, and updating movie class instances in the database. So it'll allow us to insert new movies, update current movies, delete current movies, and eventually just read whatever movies we have. All right. It says the movie DB context class derives from DB context. Again, I'm concerned right now that you have an understanding of what this stuff means. So if you look on the screen, what I just put in blue is it means that the movie DB context class is a child of DB context. That's how you do it in here. Next semester, when we're doing Java, you won't use this. You'll use the word extends, because that's how Java does it. All right. So we went in and we did add that using statement. All right. So make sure you've got that using system.data.entity. So the author says down at the bottom of this particular lesson right here, on at the very bottom, here the author says, hey, even though we haven't done anything with it yet, we finally added a model. So we now, at least in theory, have all three parts. In theory, we have all three parts of a model view controller. All right? So I can close this lesson rather. I'm going to open up the next one, which is lesson 5. Creating a connection string and working with local server DB. Again, another thing, We have experienced this before. This isn't new. All right? So the author says here, the MovieDB context class you created handles the task of connecting to the database and mapping movie objects to database records. All right? The author says there, one question you might ask, though, is how to specify which database you will connect to. You don't actually have to specify which database to use, but it's easier for you and the system if you do. So, local DB, as it says right there, it's a lightweight version of SQL Server Express. It's typically when you do the full install, okay, it's what you get by default. You get all that stuff. There's nothing extra you have to add. All right. When you create databases in there, if you look right here, those databases are saved as .mdf files, Microsoft Database Format files. All right. Local DB database files are kept in the app data folder of the web project. And you've already noticed, hopefully, because I've shown it to you, we already have an app data. There's nothing in it yet. All right. But we could come in here. In fact, you can all do this right now. Okay. Let's right mouse click on here. And let's choose Add. And let's choose New Item. So we're going to right mouse click on our app data folder, choose Add, and choose New Item. Now, does everyone's screen look like this? If it doesn't, make sure you're right under Visual C#. Choose SQL Database. All right, and this is going to be a Movies MVC database. So let's call it what it is, Movies MVC. Everybody see this? Can everybody read that okay? Evan, you see that okay? All right. So make sure you've selected SQL Server Database, Movies MVC. After you put that in, hit Enter or click Add. What you'll notice then is in our app data, there it is. There's absolutely nothing in that database. That should make sense to you. We just created it. All right. Anybody know in here, I may have mentioned this to you before. Look up on the screen, please. Anybody know what L stands for in that file? Anybody want to guess? It's a log file. It's log database file. What it's ideally supposed to be doing is logging every change that is being made to the database. All right? All right. Now, a couple more things that they mention here. And again, I'm going over this stuff because I'm trying to be consistent here. But the author says right here, SQL Server Express is not recommended for production use. In other words, this works fine what we're doing on our own machine. But if we were going to move this to a server, you know, let's say that we want to be the new Amazon. All right, and so we're starting to create this. We can test and test and test the hell out of it on our own machine. But when we put it out to a new server, we're going to have to make changes. All right, and that's what the author is saying. All right, in Visual Studio 2017, local DB is installed by default. So unless you're Tony and you don't have an install yet, all right, you've got it on there. By default, as it says, the entity framework looks for a connection string with the same name as the object context class MovieDB context. All right. So the author says, open the application root web.config. We talked about this before. Please look up on the screen just for a second. You do not, repeat, you do not want the web config that's under views. You don't want that one. All right, in fact, I think that's open here. Not anymore. You want the one that's down on the bottom of the screen. So double click on that to open that, please. Then look in here for the connection string element. On mine at least, it looks like it starts on line 13. Yours should be the same, I would think. All right. So it says, find that. element that's right there. All right. And then it says add the following. Now, please listen for a second. Look up on the screen. It may be in your best interest, even if you haven't been doing this, to come out here and actually go out, bring up the Word version of this. Why? So you can go out to here where it says to add that connection string. You can grab all of that. All right? You understand? I would recommend you do that. And then place it right underneath the other one. So right mouse click on this, choose copy. All right, go back to your project, find where the first one ends, hit enter, and paste in this one. We're going to have to make a change, so you know. All right, it says connection string, etc., initial catalog, MVC movie, etc. All right. Well, when I told you to create this database, because I just couldn't wait. All right, when I told you to create it, we created movies MVC. So where this says movies, right there, change that on yours that you just copied in, change it to movies MVC. I believe you'll have to do that to get it to work. And one thing to realize about this, you're all smart people in here. So when I say this, please don't think I'm trying to insult your intelligence. Remember when we had that attached DB thing and it was broken up into two and that's why it didn't work? Anything that's in here, look on the screen please. Anything that's in here in double quotes, like this, don't split up. Don't split a string like that up over two lines. That's why by default when you copied it, connection string is on a line by itself. We're up here when we put in the connection string, it's not. Now again, is that important? It can be. How's that? All right. So the author explains in here at least a little bit what's in this connection string. So let's look at it. All right. It says add name movie DB context. See that one right there? Everybody see this? What's in blue? Movie DB context. It's getting that from there. Does that make sense? There is a mapping that's going on here. All right, so we've got that. All right. And let's just keep following it here. Connection string, the data source, this says we're using our local database server. All right. The initial catalog is MVC movie. How does it get that? That was what we named the project. Remember when we first started? All right. The integrated security, there is some built-in security right there. I don't remember what SSPI stands for. All right, but it is a little bit of extra security. And this is the name of the database we want to connect to. So that right there is this right there. All right, that right there is this right here. So the first connection string, the default one, that's the one that we're using because we set up our authentication to single user authentication and we have the register and login. That's what that first database is for. So when you go in there and you set yourself up as a user, you'll be put into one of those tables. All right, that's what they're talking about. Again, the name of the connection string must match the name of the DB context class. All right. Now, the author says this, and they said it in our book too, so I just want to repeat it. The author says here, you don't actually need to add the movie DB context connection string. If you don't specify it, the entity framework, all right, will basically figure it out based on the fact that you've got an MVC models MovieDB context. All right. It says you can name the database anything you like as long as it has an MDF suffix. For example, you could name the database My Films. We named ours Movies MVC. All right. Next, we'll build a new movies controller that you can use to display the data and allow users then to actually go in and start adding their own movies. All right. So we've gone through now the first 5. My question, any questions on anything we've done in any of these first 5 lessons? Oh, there it is. See, I had my sound off. And actually, our president knows I'm not a fan, so I didn't get the notice. Is that right? Okie doke. All right. Before we come in and start doing anything with the accessing your model's data and we start this lesson 6, it's 1:18. Let's take a short break, okay? Let's come back at 1:25. So take 7 minutes. If you've got to, as the saying goes, hit the head, or if you got to quickly go down. I know you're without your significant other, so that's going to be tough for you today, Matt, but deal with it. Do the best you can, okay? So we'll start up with lesson 6 at 1:25.